What's up everybody, I'm Jason and welcome back to the channel. So in my last video I looked at 10 features and functions that are in the EOS R5 that I'd like to see Canon bring to the R5C. This time around I'm going to flip that on its head and look at 10 things that are in the R5C that I'd like to see Canon bring to the EOS R5. So like last time, the same constraints apply here as well. So all of the features I'm going to cover exist already in the EOS R5C. Secondly, everything I'm going to cover is software-based, so I'm not asking for any hardware changes or anything like that. Finally, as in the last video, when I say R5C, I'm really using that as shorthand to say the R5C's video mode and Canon Cinema EOS in general. Likewise, when I say the EOS R5, I'm talking about Canon's Photo EOS OS, including the photo mode on the R5C. So, starting with number 10, multiple custom white balances. Compared to the R5C, the R5 has a whole pile more predefined white balances, including daylight, cloud, shade, tungsten, fluorescent, and of course auto and Kelvin. But there's only one custom white balance for the camera. Now, in the R5C, Canon doesn't have most of those predefined white balances. There's only daylight and tungsten presets. However, in place of having a ton of presets, the R5C has two custom white balances, A and B, of course, along with auto and Kelvin. So when push comes to shove, this isn't really a huge deal, which is why it's number 10 on my list, but at the same time, it seems like it could be a really useful feature even on the R5 in photo mode, and certainly shouldn't be hard for Canon to implement if they wanted to do so. At number 9 on my list is the real-time display of the current color temperature and color correction values. So the one thing the R5C does really well is it constantly keeps the photographer in the loop, or videographer I guess you could say, in the loop as to what the current color temperature and correction values are. And this happens in all of the modes, including auto and custom. The camera is always going to display the color temperature in Kelvin and the green magenta correction. Now, if we step over to the R5, this information is, well, actually completely absent. Even in review mode, the camera only displays an icon indicating the white balance mode that the image was created with, but nothing more beyond that. Now, again, this is a small detail, but it's one that I've found that has been quite handy when trying to set up multiple cameras with matching white balances without having to go through the specifics of using a white balance reference on every camera. Number 8 on my list is the real-time display of the lens's focal length. Now, okay, I'll be the first to admit that most of the time I don't care what focal length I'm shooting at. I'm looking at the composition and not the numbers. However, there are times when I do care, and this is just plain useful in those instances. Moreover, as a heavy user of zooms, I've found this feature is quite useful when I'm trying to replicate a previous setup or a setup that I know was shot with a specific focal length lens by somebody else. I can note down the number, down whatever focal length my lens was set to, and then I can dial it back in when I set the camera up for the next shoot. Now, of course, why not just use the focal length numbers on the lens? Well, where exactly is 30 millimeters on this lens? I can tell you when it's on my R5C because I can look at the back of the display, but I can't do that on my R5, and guessing is still guessing. Number 7 on my list is better button customization. So, as with most modern cameras, the R5 has an incredible variety of functions that may or may not be relevant to any given user. However, when it comes to accessing those features on the R5, there is some big limitations. So, first of all, you can't assign every function to every customizable button. There are some functions that only apply to certain buttons. Secondly, you can't assign a button to take you to an arbitrary menu entry that doesn't have a button-optimized function for it. And this is where the R5C has a leg up on the R5. So like the R5, the R5C has a limited set of functions, it's pretty extensive, but still limited, that are optimized for direct button access. However, the camera doesn't limit which of the customizable buttons you can assign those functions to. Secondly, the R5C has a generic menu user setting option that allows you to map a button to take you directly to any arbitrary menu entry. Need to frequently get to some esoteric setting that's not included in the list of normal options? No problem, this function has you covered. Between the two of these features, I find that the R5C's button customization is just more flexible and capable than what's available in the R5. Moving on to number 6, scrolling between menu pages. So both the R5 and the R5C allow you to navigate the menus with the dials on the camera. The main dial behind the shutter release allows you to skip from page to page. The top dial where the mode button is lets you skip between entire sections. And finally, the rear dial lets you move up and down between the entries on any given page. However, the R5C takes this a step further, as you can scroll between pages using the rear dial simply by scrolling off the top or the bottom of the page that you're currently on. So if you're on the top menu entry and you scroll up, instead of jumping to the bottom of the page, you then jump to the last menu entry on the previous page. Likewise, if you're on the last entry and scroll down, instead of jumping to the top of the current page, you jump to the top entry on the next page. Now, like with most of these wish list items, this is a seemingly minor point, and honestly, it's something I never thought I'd really care about that much until I got my R5C. However, having used the menus in the R5C for a couple of weeks now, I can say I really miss this ability when I'm in the menus on my R5. Moving along to number 5, the leveling interface. So there's a lot of places in photography and videography where leveling the camera is important, if not necessary, and both the R5 and R5C provide their users with built-in tools to level the camera. Now on the R5, this takes the form of what I'd best describe as the 8-ball that an astronaut or fighter pilot would be at home using. And while the tracking autofocus system on the R5 reminds me of the HUD from the movie Top Gun, sometimes I want something more subtle that doesn't get in the way of me seeing the picture that I'm making instead of pretending that I'm Maverick. And here again, the R5C can do this slightly better than the R5. The virtual level on the R5C is much more minimalistic, consisting of two small, what I'd best describe as virtual bubble levels. Moreover, the camera can be configured to display the horizontal, vertical, or both axes independently instead of being an all or nothing situation. Number 4. Focus peaking, or better focus peaking. So both the R5 and R5C have focus peaking when you're manually focusing. Where the R5C takes the win here is in the way it allows you to configure it. So to start with, there are the color choices. On the R5, you can pick between red, yellow, and blue. The R5C adds white to this list, which has essentially the effect of increasing the contrast of the focus area or in focus area without dramatically changing its color. And personally, I find this preferable to any of the color options that the R5 has. Secondly, you have fine control over the intensity, Canon calls it the gain on the R5C, and the frequency that the peaking system works on. Now, I haven't dug into this in any great detail and depth yet. That will be in a video in the future. But the short of it is that this gives you way better control over how brightly the peaking shows up and in what ranges and levels compared to what you can do on the R5, which is basically you have two options, low and high. Number 3, movie servo focusing limits. So one of my favorite features in the Cinema EOS OS is that continuous focusing can be configured so that it doesn't hunt when it loses the tracked subject. Something that the R5 just can't do. Now, the functionality is enabled on the R5C by setting the continuous focusing mode to only around the focus point, and in this mode, the camera will continue to track and focus on the subject under the point. However, if the subject moves too far away, gets out from under the point, steps out of frame, whatever, then the camera just stops focusing. It doesn't start looking for something else to focus on. Basically, there's a limit to just how out of focus the area under the focus point can be before the camera will attempt to focus on it. But it gets better because this feature comes with an additional benefit. The camera informs you if there's nothing that it's prepared to focus on by altering the color of the autofocus box. So when you see a yellow box on the R5C, the camera is telling you that there's nothing under the autofocus box that's close enough for the camera to actually focus on. Number 2 on my list is, and this really could easily be my top feature, the ability to back out of menus using the cancel or delete button instead of having to press the menu button. So the one thing that's always frustrated me about the menus on the R5 and really Canon's DSLRs even before that is that they're very difficult to work one-handed. You can navigate down into menu entries easily enough, change settings, so forth, using the multi-controller, the dials, and the set button. But going back up a level requires pressing the menu button, and that's all the way over on the left side of the camera from where your grip is and all the other controls on the right. Now on the R5C, you can back out of the menu simply by hitting the cancel button, which is the delete image button in photo mode. Now, of course, when you're using the menus, this button is unused for basically everything anywhere that I can think of, at least offhand, on the R5. So it would be a perfectly usable button to have as back or cancel. Well, I think there's a couple of places that it's used to delete settings, but even there, that can be easily reconfigured. Now, like many of these wishes, this one is again a seemingly small and not really big deal kind of change. But it's one of the many small differences between the photo and video OSs that I constantly run into when switching between the two. Though, at least in this case, I've truthfully always found it annoying to have to reach across the camera to hit the menu button to back out of menus anyway, even going back to DSLRs. Finally, coming in at number 1 on my list is more granular control over the information displayed in the live image heads-up display. Now, admittedly, the heads-up display on the R5 and R5C are somewhat different in their scope and intent. However, both are capable of displaying a lot of information about the camera's current state, some of which isn't always going to be relevant to you. Where the two differ is in the extent to which you can customize that information. So on the R5, you have very coarse control over what's being displayed. There's only a few functions that you have individual control over, specifically the grid, level, and histogram. But if you don't want to see specific sort of tangential or shooting information, say, for example, the picture style or the digital lens optimizer level, you can't turn them off individually while still displaying others like, say, the metering or drive modes. Now on the R5C, virtually every element that's displayed over the live image can be toggled on or off individually. Want to see the focus distance but not a distance scale? You can do that. Don't want to see the focus mode? You can turn that off too. Headphone volume? Same there, can be turned on and off individually or specifically. Now granted, most of the stuff on this list arguably falls on the minor side of the scale. Now this isn't to say that either the R5 or R5C are so amazingly perfect cameras that there's only minor improvements that could be made to them. However, I find most of the time the things that grate on me the most are really small, often trivial things. You know, these little things that become sort of a death of 1,000 cuts type of problem rather than one major significant shortcoming. So, if I missed something that you find invaluable on the R5C that you'd like to see brought to the R5 or Canon's Cinema EOS OS that brought to the Photo OS, again, keeping with the spirit of this video, let me know in the comments below. If you found this interesting, let me know by hitting that like button. If this kind of thing seems like it might be your kind of thing, please consider subscribing if you're not already. And finally, if you know somebody who might find this useful, consider it sharing with them. It helps them, it helps me, it makes you look like hero of the day, and it's all free, so why not? And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.